excited here for Bible class here at Faith. For those of you that are joining us online, I forget to remind you of this sometimes because it's just my phone floating on a tripod. But the Bible class lesson is located on our website. And so if you want to look at that, you could, if you have the ability to download it and so forth, you can make use of that. And prayerfully, some of the fill-ins that we have give you some context of conversations and some even your own growth and learning as you go on this coming week. You're not supposed to have favorites. And in certain circumstances, like my kids and so forth, I think the same could be said of, you guys are all busy looking at those things up on the screen. It's like having students again when I was a teacher. They're like, listen to me right now. Right? This is my favorite miracle today. The one of Jesus walking on the water. It just is. And I'm going to share some of those things with you today. And so I wanted to share this with you, is that there's a book that written by a pastor named John Ortberg, and it's years and years ago. I don't actually remember when it was written. He used to be a teaching pastor at Willow Creek Community Church in Chicago, or one of the suburbs. And so I have this book. So if you're interested in reading, I think an excellent book on this miracle, right? It's the long title is, if you want to walk on water, you got to get out of the boat. That's the long part of the title. But if you want to see that, if you want to look at it, if you want to borrow mine, I'd be willing to rent it to you for a very low fee. But no, if you'd like to borrow it and take a look at it, you have to deal with all my markings if you ever borrow a book from me. They're all marked up. But it was an excellent treatise on not only the biblical miracle, but really what does it teach us? Because one of the important things about miracles is we don't just read them and go, neat, or be in awe. There's more of a reason that it's in Scripture for us and that Scripture is still available to us. It's not just to be in awe of God's power. There's something, hence the reason for this Bible class, there's something for us to learn. All right? So, if you have a Bible handy, you should in front of you. Those of you at home, I hope you have something, whether it's electronic or physical. There, take a look at John chapter 6. That was your assignment to read for this coming week, or for this past week, rather. The coming week is on the back. And the miracle. This is actually highlighted in, I think, 3 of the Gospels, if I remember. It might be all 4 of them, but I know that it's 3. And one of the things I want you to note about this is we're not going to necessarily read through it. We'll pick it apart in a second here. But this is one of the longest miracles, right? And here's what I mean by that. There are some details in the story that I just find, interesting. Why do it this way? Now, Jesus sent the disciples on ahead of him out into the Sea of Galilee. In John, if you read this, it actually tells you how far they went by the time this thing happens. So to get clear on this, they are 3.5 miles offshore. And Jesus comes to them on the water. That's a stroll. 3.5 miles. Right? Now, I'm not suggesting that God couldn't have simply appeared a couple hundred yards off and then start walking toward him. He's God. He could do that. But either way, this miracle could have taken a little over an hour to walk 3.5 miles. I don't know how easy it is to walk on water. Right? I really don't. I can't tell you. I'm going to ask him when I get there. Right? Is it easy? Do you slide? Do you fall back when you get on a wave? Or did you surf? What was it that you did? And how did you do it? But it is a long miracle. Now, I imagine that the feeding of the 5,000 we talked about, which was actually 15,000, 20,000 people in reality. I know that the meal took a long time, but the actual miraculous multiplication of the fish and the loaves, I imagine, was relatively brief, right? And maybe as you pass it along, it kept multiplying, so maybe that took some time. But this one is just interesting to me that Jesus takes this stroll, right? Now, one of the things in Mark, it doesn't say this in John, but I just can't help but mention it. In Mark, it says, I think it's in Mark, it says, as Jesus was about to pass by, they saw him and thought he was a ghost. About to pass by? Was he just going to keep going? He was kind of going, you guys are rocking in that boat and you guys get nervous and stuff like that. I'll meet you on the other side. It's a whole lot easier for me. I don't know if that's what the case was, but one of the other Gospels just highlight that. All right. The Sea of Galilee is actually a scene of several of Jesus' miracles. Interesting, he seems to have a place in his heart for this. And there's been miracles below, right? Below the surface. So think of the amazing catch of fish, right? That happened in the Sea of Galilee. That was below the surface. Above the surface, when Jesus calmed the storm, right? That was on the Sea of Galilee when his disciples were in the boat and he was asleep in the bow of the boat. You remember that? They woke him up. They said, "Don't you care? We're going to die." And he just kind of, I don't know if he rolled his eyes, but I bet he did, right? And just kind of going, "Oh, your faith, right? I'm right here in the boat, right? You have absolutely nothing to fear." And he stands up and he rebukes the wind and the waves and so forth and then so forth. And then on the surface, that's today's, walking on the water. So the Sea of Galilee seems to have a sense of location for Jesus. Now, I imagine that because people tended to migrate to the Sea of Galilee. It was an important place for them, for their commerce, for their interaction and so forth. And not to mention, he had a bunch of guys that were fishermen. And so naturally, they just kind of found themselves there. It's how they transport, east and west to go to various places. However, we have a natural tendency to explain away what we don't understand. It has actually been proven, not demonstrated, but proven based on physics, that if you can run 72 miles an hour for a certain distance, you can stay on top of the water. Right? If you could run 72 miles an hour. Now, Usain Bolt, which is, I believe, still the fastest guy on the planet, broke all sorts of Olympic records. I think he topped out at 21 miles an hour. And I've seen him run. I don't think I can triple that. I'm pretty sure. Not even falling downhill, I don't think so.
He ran for like 100 or 200 yards.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So the reality is, there's actually this is a weird thing. It's how culture is impacted by religion. There's actually a lizard. If you've ever seen this lizard that runs on water, and they actually lovingly call it the Jesus Christ lizard. And in a panic, he gets up on two legs, his back legs, they're webbed, and he runs. Go on YouTube and look up the Jesus Christ lizard. And he runs fast enough to where he can stay above water. So if something's chasing him on land and there's water, it's a good way to get away. They can't run on water. If they jump in, they'll sink and have to swim. And he's just on two legs. The funniest thing you ever seen. Kind of looks like me sometimes when I'm running away from something scary. But we have a natural tendency, and I'm going to express this a little bit in a couple of different ways. A lot of times we say something like this: I have to see it to believe it. Right? When I was growing up, when I'd get together with the guys in my neighborhood, we'd like kids do, we'd brag about stuff. I bet I could climb to the top of that tree. We'd get our bikes out and build ramps. What a ridiculous activity that was, right? I went through a lot of bikes as a kid doing that because we weren't the wisest builders, right? And so I bet I could jump over this, right? And my friends would always say the same thing: prove it, right? It's usually how I use it. Most of the scars on my head, if you ever come sit behind me, I got scars in the back of my head. Every one of those started with, watch this. Every single injury I've ever had, I think, in my head alone started that way. And so we say, I got to see it to believe it, right? If Jesus walked on water, right, there's a need for us intellectually to be able to go, I need to know how. How did that happen? And so instead, I would say that if we are going to benefit by God's expression of miracles to us, and we need to reverse that. In fact, I think you got to believe it to see it. Right? You got to believe it to see it. Because I think one of the things that comes through loud and clear for me is that if you're going to wait to have things intellectually or physically explained to you, and God doesn't necessarily operate within that realm all the time because he is divine and he is miraculous, you are going to miss out on a lion's share, pun intended, of what God is doing around us. Because you'll say, well, if I can't explain how God did it, then I don't believe that he did it. Or I believe there was another explanation, right? In fact, I was reading on this week. I was trying to say, what are some alternative explanations for what people will say, caused Jesus to walk on water? Now, there's certainly a large number of people that just disregard the Bible and say, I don't believe it's true, I don't believe in God, so therefore the miracles aren't an issue. But for those that go, I think there's some truth to it, I believe something happened with this, but maybe there was another explanation. These are the folks, not to jump too far away here, these are the folks that say Jesus wasn't dead when they put him in the grave. He was unconscious. And the coolness and the dampness of the tomb caused him to kind of become revived, and then he walked out later on. Not to mention he has to move that giant stone, and he was beaten to a pulp and so forth because of the whipping and scourging and so forth like that. You're like, it kind of falls apart. But that helps them get past this idea of the resurrected body. Right? They're like, well, maybe he was just unconscious, and that's what happened. You're like, then that Roman that pierced him with the sword didn't do a very good job. Right? This is a Roman soldier, and they're usually pretty good at that kind of thing. Right? So what I looked up, and I found this really fascinating, there's actually a weather circumstance, meteorological, and there's another study to it, lithography. Anyhow, rapid change in physics. And they said that during cold front, warm front, coming down on the water, rapid change of temperature can cause ice to form. And so maybe ice formed on the Sea of Galilee, and he got on that and kind of surfed it out to the disciples. Right? Now, I can't imagine Jesus coming out there and just seeing the disciples, and kind of like, just come out to me and all this, come on, right? And to see that was it. But that was, again, the reason that explanation is being proposed is we're trying to find a physical explanation to what is being presented as unbelievable, right? So we want to explain it, right? Now, this is the same sin from the very beginning. Right? Satan tempted Adam and Eve and said, if you eat this fruit, finish it for me. If you eat of this fruit,
you'll be like God.
You will be like God. You will absolutely understand the things of God because you will be his equal. God will not have you under his thumb anymore. You will be God. This actually is common in other religions. Right? In the Mormon faith, you're going to be a God. Right? Even Scientology, as whacked out as that is, and I say that lovingly. If I talk to a person who was chasing after Scientology, I want them to know Jesus. But it is a bizarre religion to say that you are an extraterrestrial trapped in these human things that are attached to you, and if you get rid of those, you'll be that extraterrestrial being again, once again. Read up on Scientology. It's entertaining. Right? I mean entertaining from the standpoint you learn if you ever do talk to somebody, you can go, I want to tell you about something else. Right? This is not going to help, this belief in that. L. Ron Hubbard, who wrote that, he's the one that created Scientology. Literally wrote about it, said, I bet I could create a religion. I mean, that's crazy. Right? And maybe that's not a pun. Maybe that's accurate. Right? So when we see that, you got to believe it to see it. If I could give you a negative example of this. Positive example, obviously, is what we're talking about with the miracles. But a negative example is when you read into an email something that wasn't intended. Right? That's this. That's a negative example of that. You believe something about the person who wrote you the email, so then the words take on that tenor. You guys follow me? Right? I'm always very cautious. I try to be, at least. So, believe me. When I send an email, I'm like, here's what I intend to communicate. And then sometimes it's misunderstood where they're like, wow, that was really harsh. I'm like, really? Good morning was harsh? Right? And I'm like, well, but see, there's a belief sometimes going into it, so then therefore what I see is shaped by what I believe. You guys follow me? Right? Like, for instance, if my wife says, are you going to wear that shirt with those pants? Which, shockingly enough, that happens often. I know you think I look pretty put together, but if it's not on the mannequin this way, I usually don't put it together. But I believe she has my best interest, right? I don't take it as a criticism. I sit there and go, thank you, right? Because I believe something so that what I hear and see is shaped by that belief, okay? It's kind of like if you believe that everything somebody says is a lie. Kind of hard to change your mind because your belief system is kind of slotted in that way. So as Christians, let's take this positively, if we believe that God is capable of the miraculous, then you start to see the miraculous a little bit more. I'm going to make some sense out of that in a second here. There isn't a cognitive, that means brain, intellect, category for the supernatural. You and I cannot figure it out. I cannot tell you how it is that Jesus walked on water. I cannot explain it. I don't know if the tensile strength of water suddenly changed where he was, right? That means the amount of adhesion that the water molecules have. You guys have ever seen the little water strider, little insect, skates along on the water and so forth, and we're like, wow, that's cool. Well, it's because he's unbelievably light. He has little tiny hairs on his legs that won't break through the molecules of water, so he can stay on top, right? You and we have, I don't know what the pressure is on my feet as I stand up, but it is heavy. I don't just mean your body weight, but based on the square footage of my feet and soles, it's a huge amount of weight. And obviously, it's too strong for the water molecules. They just break apart, and you go, good night, and you go swimming, okay? So I don't know what took place for Jesus to walk on the water. What I do believe is he broke the rules, right? There are natural laws that are in place, and he broke them, okay? But because they're his rules, he can do that. I often say that to people when they're like, well, I don't believe this is true about God, and it's something that's miraculous. And I'll often share with them, they're his rules. I've had this conversation about many subjects out there, about people that will tell me that I believe I saw, right, the spirit of a dearly departed person. And I said, God doesn't talk about that those things are available in action and so forth, not in the way that God says. Now, could God decide that you're going to see one? They're his rules. I don't think they happen as often as people claim they do, right? Near-death experiences or things like that. There's a lot of things that you kind of go, I'm not sure that fills in with where God is and when he communicates in his word. All right, I didn't mean to open up that can of worms. In your Bible, please, Matthew 14. If you have it open, somebody have it. Read it out loud. 14:26.
But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear.
Now, this is really an interesting statement. Now, I'm not going to give you a ton of details and history on this. It's fascinating to read about. The Jews, actually, ancient man. I'll just lump it all in together like that. Ancient man was terrified of the water. Not like we should avoid it, but it was a place of evil. Many of them actually believed it was the gateway to hell, or Hades, or so forth. And the reason that has changed people's thinking about. People already had a healthy respect for, hey, there's things out here that they're not warm and fuzzy and pedal. I mean, in Michigan, my family used to hike a great deal in the woods and way up north and things like that. We knew that there were bears and wolves and things that you go, yeah, you're not gonna necessarily drop your guard on those things, but you just learn to kind of live with them. But Jaws was one of those things that anytime I was swimming in water as a kid, right? I grew up in the 60s and 70s. We used to vacation in Canada. We'd go up to these big lakes and go swimming and stuff. And you'd be out there, just kind of treading water and water that's, 50 to 100 feet deep. And, in your mind, there's a da-da, 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 and you're just kind of like, that nervousness, and you're just kind of like, so it created that unknown that even though I'm in fresh water, right? Yeah, it could be, right? I mean, it's possible. There's that fear. And so here's the thing. The disciples see Jesus, and they first go to, it's a ghost. Now, I want to break this down for you a little bit. It's kind of like this. I use a modern example here for a calculator. I couldn't find a picture of an old calculator. But if you remember, not too long ago, there were calculators, when you tried to program in a problem, it would just go, error. I can't do it. Right? Now you have graphing calculators now that just go, oh, it's 10 to the 100th power, and it tells you all those things. But back when you had smaller ones, you'd go, what is 1,900,000 times 4 million? And you'd just go, error. So I can't do it. I can't calculate that. It's too much. Too complicated. Okay? And so the disciples are there. They don't go, oh, is that Jesus walking on the water? And yet it was Jesus walking on the water. Now, were there lots of circumstances that contributed to it? One is, he's done this before, right? It's in the middle of the night. We're out in the water, creepy. We feel a lot better when Jesus is with us and he sent us out here by ourselves. A little windy, right? Peter's been telling stories about people that have died at the sea and things like that. Got everybody kind of freaked out, right? This is the place where Sawtooth was caught one time, and 900-pound carp, swallowed men whole. Right around here. Peter, knock it off, man. Matthew's out there just kind of going, I'm a tax collector. I hate it out here, you know. So the point is, it just simply doesn't compute for them. That's why they jump to ghosts. I'm going to break into that a little bit. My family, we just watched a movie not too long ago, John Travolta. Just a couple weeks ago we found this, and it's called Phenomenon. I'm not recommending the movie. I just want to give some insight to this because what happens, this was in the mid-90s. I think they made this, mid-90s, maybe 25 years ago. He's pretty young in it. It's a small town guy, mechanic, celebrating his birthday, walks outside, it's the middle of the night, and they've all had a few beers, and this bright light flashes from the sky. And afterwards, he is just unbelievably altered. Really smart, can learn anything at any point. Then he can even start moving things with his mind. And of course, in this small town, this is what I'm bringing up, they're trying to explain how is it possible. Were they extraterrestrials? You know, have you been given some unique ability? And they start to treat him a different way because they can't compute the fact that, for instance, there were these migrant workers that the little boy was suffering from food poisoning, and he was somewhere lost out in an orchard. And he's like, we got to find him. And his grandfather's trying to tell him where he is, but he just speaks Portuguese. And nobody in the town spoke Portuguese. So John Travolta's character, John Malley, I think what it was, learns Portuguese, the whole language, on the ride over. Just has the Portuguese thing, he's just going through it, reading it. By the time he gets there, he's just having this dialogue with the grandpa. He goes, oh, he was out in the orchard. Oh, he's playing in a fort. Oh, we'll go look for him. And he goes and finds him. And they're all like, how did you learn this, like, on the drive over? So they're trying to explain this. And by the end of the movie, it turns out it's a tumor. It's grown in his brain, kind of octopus tentacles, and he touched other areas and stimulated them and so forth. You still don't know by the end of the movie how it got there and what caused it. So it creates this problem, right? We're like, I can't solve it. I can't explain. Like most of us, my kids and I, we were talking, we said, oh, you know, the brain, we think that we tap about 10% of it, right? You guys may have heard that we think that we tap 10%. There's really no way of knowing that unless somebody else can tap 100%. We just kind of hook it up with the dial and go, there's a lot of activity in here, about 10% of it, right? And then we go, so that's all we can actually tap. We don't know. I can tell you, God doesn't give us extra parts and pieces. I really believe everything we have is what we have. But anyhow, that's kind of the interesting thing about that. So the point I'm getting at is imagination is actually a function of memory. Right? When you imagine something, you don't start from nothing. Now, does it seem weird? Just reflect back right now the weirdest dream you've had recently. I'm fascinated by dreams. I don't mean interpreting them and things like that. God has given a handful of people that ability. I'm fascinated on what I dream at times. I don't dream much anymore, but sometimes they're just the weirdest combination of things. And I've read about it in my biology background. I'm fascinated on what they believe dreams are. We don't know for sure, but it's your body at a time when you are reformatting and putting things in appropriate files that I think you're just conscious enough to kind of go, why is that duck wearing glasses and sitting in my living room in the dream? And you're like, doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But as I was at the park, I saw a duck. I couldn't find my glasses this morning, and I just put it in a place. And so in my brain, that's the dream. Put those three things together as I'm putting them together, right? If you ever played that card game Apples to Apples with kids, that is what your brain is doing. Here's three unrelated things, put them together, and there's your weird dream, okay? And so the point is imagination for the disciples. When they see someone walking on the water, they draw to any connection they can. They don't say, oh, there's Jesus out for a walk. That is the greatest thing I've ever seen. Because they don't have any memories of Jesus doing this before. So they jump to, what do I imagine it is? And it's because Peter's been telling us these stories about the specters that walk on the water in the middle of the night. I've seen them when I'm fishing out here. I can tell you, right? And so you naturally jump to that conclusion. The reason I, as a kid, was afraid of Jaws in a freshwater lake in Canada was because I had seen the movie. Right? And you knew the music, and so you're just out there treading water. You're like, well, this is just like that scene, right? Where he comes up and eats somebody again. And you're like, I bet there could be a shark out here. It didn't help that there was an old guy across the lake, ran a marina, and he told us about Sawtooth. right? The 8-foot muskie that lived in the Canadian River. Like, 8 foot, that's a big fish, right? And didn't hurt that he had a peg leg and walked around and Sawtooth ate that leg, right? So here's what you find. Sorry about that. When you learn more, you see more. Okay? Here's what I mean by that. If imagination is a function of memory, right? What you imagine you see, when they thought that they saw ghosts walking on the Sea of Galilee, because they didn't know much about Jesus. Right? If they would have thought, I bet that's Jesus. He told us to go ahead. I imagine he's going to come and see us again sometime. We're 3.5 miles out from shore. I bet that's him walking out here to see us. They didn't think that. They just said, I think it's a ghost. I think this is a ghost, because the only context that they had was fearful things in the ocean here, well, the Sea of Galilee, and so it must be a ghost. That's their only connection. And you guys know this. When we're in a group of people where none of us have an answer and somebody proposes something, that we all kind of latch onto it, right? This pandemic has been a great example of that. When somebody says, I've heard this, and then suddenly that's all going to be our conversation, right? If you eat asparagus, you'll never get sick. I've heard that, right? We should all eat asparagus, right? This guy just told me, so we're all kind of on board about the asparagus thing. Now, that would actually be really good for you, all eating asparagus regardless, right? I don't know that it protects you from viruses, but it's good for you. So when you learn more, you see more. Here's what I mean by that. If you ever sat outside on a starry night with an astronomer, right? He's going to see or she's going to see more than you'll see. Not because they got better eyes, but because they understand more about the heavens. Right? They're like, I don't know if you know this constellation here. Those 3 stars in the belt are actually 700 million miles apart from each other, but when we see them, they look all close together. Somebody at a get-together I had just this last week have been lecturing me on the Christmas star. Have you guys been following this at all? The movement of some of the planets and things you see right at dusk and so forth. And I'm learning a lot, so that now when I see that, if I do see it, then I'm kind of like, well, I now know that those are the 2 planets, and their orbits are now going to start to cross at a certain time. You see it, and you're like, oh, fascinating. Okay? I've had people try to explain to me what the Christmas star was when Jesus was born, right? And so forth. And you guys know that star was what led the wise men to him. But it was 2 years of travel. I can tell you the Christmas star isn't going to last for 2 years, right? Nor is it bright enough to actually go, you ought to go right here. Come down this way, okay? Anyhow, musicians. When I talk to musicians, I don't know a lot about music. I know enough. But somebody would sit there and go, oh, would you listen to that? I had a guy that when I was in Midland in youth ministry, I used to run a youth center for our church. And there was a guy that was a bass player, and he was a bass player from Whitesnake. I don't know if you know what Whitesnake was, a pretty big name. And he was a bass player at one time, and he's Christian. And he was helping out our church with our music and our worship and things like that. And the band, we had a worship band as well as an organist, had different services. And he would listen to the band play, and he would just sit there and he'd put the headphones on and he goes, the guitar has an E chord that's flat. Right, the E string. And I'm like, all that racket up there, and you can pick out the E string on that guitar? And the guy would go, wait, stop a minute. Ding, ding, ding. Oh, yeah. Ding, ding, ding. And then I'm like, what an ear. But because musicians have learned more, they hear more or see more. That sommelier, does anybody know what that is?
Wine master.
Wine master. I learned something through that. Right? Now, there's people that really know wine. I'm not one of them. Right? This is what I know. I don't like it. Kind of it. Right? And that's it. Then somebody goes, well, try this. Nope, I don't like that either. Okay? Just not a fan. And yet there are people that kind of go, and they say these things, kind of got an oaky flavor. Right? This one's a little drier. I'm like, it's liquid. How can it be dry? Right? So I need to learn more so I can experience more. Maybe you need to take your pastor under your wing and be able to go, listen, it is okay, right? You've just been drinking lousy wine, right? That's the thing. But when you learn more about Christ, let's bring this around full circle. When you learn more about Jesus, you're going to see more. If you don't, you don't see near enough. I was going to show you a picture. I shared this with my wife, and I'm not going to show it. Right? There's an artist. Here's why. There's an artist. His name is Al Seckles, and he created on a vase once this what they call positive negative artwork. And so there's just black imagery, and then when you look past the negative imagery, the white imagery is the picture. right? So it's not just an outline, it's several little things. Well, what it is, here's why I didn't show it to you. It's a male and woman embracing, right? And they're not clothed, okay? It's not erotic, it's just they're embracing. However, the picture of the man and the woman are formed by 9 dolphins, their images laid around different places so that when you kind of look beyond the negative space, you'll probably be like, oh, there's 2 bodies there. And they're hugging and so forth. Here's what they found. This is why I tell you that. As adults, we look at the picture and go, oh, it's 2 nude bodies embracing. You show it to children, and they go, there's 9 dolphins there. Because, see, they don't have the context of embracing bodies. They just don't. They don't have that. So children just look at it, and they look at the only context they do have. There's the silhouette of a dolphin, right? It's just one of those fascinating things. Now, because this is being filmed and there's sometimes kids in here, that's why I didn't show that. But it does make the point of your imagination goes to what you know, right? What you understand cognitively. All right, so how does mankind respond when Jesus shows up? I think there's various ways, and we even see it a little bit in miracles, but this is good for us as well. The first thing that we often do is we ignore it. Because we don't think it's possible. So we say things like, oh, that was good luck. Oh, that was fate. Oh, what were the odds of that? And we talk about those things. I've told you this before. If you ever send me those emails that say, if you forward this to 10 other people, you will have good luck this week. You're going to get a lecture, right, in return. Because we don't believe in luck as Christians. We don't believe in fate. There is no unseen force other than God that is at work in this world. Now, do I think that God uses those things? Sure he can. Okay? I don't think God uses, please forward this picture to 10 other people and I'll bless you. Right? I think he just says, listen, get away from the computer. Go talk to somebody about me. Right? I think that's what he wants. But a lot of people, when Jesus shows up, some people just ignore it. People did in biblical times all the time. Right? Not everybody came to believe in Jesus. Now, sometimes they see it, they wrestle with it, and they don't believe it. They're like, oh, I saw the multiplication of fish and loaves. I saw it happen. I was there that day. Do I believe he's the Messiah? I doubt it. Because I still believe that the Messiah is going to be a military leader. I think he's a great teacher, maybe a great prophet. Maybe they did have a pile of food on the backside of the hill that we didn't see, and they were going over there getting it, passing around. So I don't believe it was a miracle. I believe that maybe there's there's some other explanation. Or maybe we go as far as we try to intellectualize it. A weather front came down over the Sea of Galilee and created a block of ice or a layer of ice that this Jesus stood on. And they weren't really 3.5 miles out. They elaborated the story. These are people that say, these things were written well after Jesus was gone. And they kind of expounded and exaggerated and so forth. And that's what really happened. That's intellectualizing something that is meant to be miraculous. Now, hopefully, what we want to do is embrace the mystery. We don't ignore it. We don't disbelieve it. We don't try to explain it away. We just simply embrace it. And I can tell you, folks, in my, in my role as a pastor, but I think all of us as Christians, there is nothing more comforting to me. And I want you to hear this loud and clear. There's nothing more comforting to me than a God that I can't understand. Now, there's certain things I want to understand about God. I want to understand that he's here. I want to understand that he loves me. But when I'm sitting next to someone, I often share this in a hospital bed and so forth, and the doctors have said there's nothing more than we can do. I don't hang my head and go, wow. That's what we were hoping for. We were hoping for you could do something. Now, I think doctors and nurses and surgeons and those folks in the medical field are extensions of God's grace and mercy. But when they say there's nothing more we can do, we're not done. Right? Not at all. We just sit there and go, well, God may have to do a miracle in this one. He may have to do something that is outside the bounds of medical science, and he does that on a regular basis. For us to think that God doesn't do miracles anymore, it makes us pretty naive. That, God only wanted to do that in biblical times. God loves to give good gifts, and he loves to glorify himself for the sake of the people that give him glory. And so there is a need for us to be able to say, well, if that's not how God's going to do it, maybe God's going to do it this way. But see the consistency? God. If God's not going to use doctors, maybe God's going to do it miraculously. I've had times where people have said, I went into the hospital and this was the result and nobody can explain it. You're like, I can. Not because I know, but because I believe, therefore I see it. I don't notch it off as unbelievable. I notch it off as, God is really good. right? That God was willing to do that for you, to demonstrate you. Now, he did it for a reason, so let's give him credit. Let's not just walk away scratching our heads going, we need to investigate how on earth that tumor just disappeared. Because tumors don't do that. I'm like, I agree. That is not their nature. Okay? But we've got to come in. So instead, they try to find the circumstances that cause cancerous tumors to just vanish medically. And I'm like, instead of looking there, why don't you just look up and say, God says, here's some grace. Here's some mercy. Just going to remove it. And then I've got a plan. Right? The net result of seeking God is not just knowledge. Right? A lot of times we think the more we learn about God, I hope you've realized that as we gather together as church in this class, we don't gather together to just pack you full of information. This is not a sausage factory where we just keep trying to pack in more information about God. The point is to educate, certainly, but to inspire and to send. Right? In fact, one of my concerns is in church, and it has been my entire life, I'm guilty of it as well, is I think this is what we think being church is. We just come together and we learn about God. What is this, folks?
Halftime.
This is halftime, which means this is just a moment in the very purpose that we are here. This is the time that we come together and say, listen, here's where I am encouraged, here's where I am trained, here's where I am inspired, and then I got to go. I got to use what I've been given. And too often we sit and we kind of go, I'm not ready yet, just a little bit more. Right? Then I'll be ready. And you're going to be sitting there in your old age one day and kind of going, I'm not ready yet. Right? And yet God says, you're ready now. That's the reason I've put you here now. I've been prepping you all this time. My goodness, Jesus only worked with the disciples for about 3 years and started the church with them. Right? Okay. Anything less than that is actually idolatry. Right? If you think that knowledge is what's going to save you, if you think knowledge is what is going to preserve your soul, we're wrong, because then we've reduced God to information, right? Instead of revelation and transformation. That's what God intends. In fact, the Gospel of John begins, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And John was dealing with a particular movement in the church at that time. This is a little later on after Jesus obviously has ascended and so forth, is that they're dealing with this idea of Gnosticism. Gnosticism is G-N-O-S-T, Gnosticism, gnosis, and that's knowledge. And there's people that believe if you know more, right, then you're better off, right? The more you know about God, the more saved you are. This is where when Jesus talked about the faith of a child, right? They're not children that are going to lecture you on theology and doctrine. They're going to sing the song like Jesus loves me. I got news for you. That's what you need to know. Right? Jesus loves me, this I know. And that's what saves. And so we often do this a lot. We try to complicate things. Right? We're like, well, I got to understand this. I got to wrap my head around this. Or we got to just trust and believe. Right? Jesus walked on water. How is that possible? Why is that necessary? Right? Is that going to boost your faith? Or is it actually going to become kind of an idol of, but now I know how he did it? Don't you want to do that? God says, I want you to take a step of faith. You're like, I will, just tell me what's going to happen when I do. God goes, that's not faith. That's knowledge. Right? I want you to step, like, when Peter got out of the boat, he did not know he was going to walk on water. I think he believed he did. He didn't know it. If he did, every single disciple would have got out and just been running around on the Sea of Galilee. He said, Lord, call me out there. I got to believe we let go of that edge of the boat and was standing on water as a fisherman, that he was sitting there kind of, I have no idea what I'm doing out here or why I'm out here. But he's out here. That's what makes this possible. I imagine every step he took, however many there were, I don't believe there were many. Right? I don't think he was out there walking for a half hour. Right? I think he was out there for 30 seconds maybe. Walking out there and just like a toddler taking steps for the first time. I'm standing on water. All the disciples are all just looking at him. And he's just kind of, check this out, right? I'm walking. And then he kind of looks around, looks away from Jesus and waves and goes, holy cow, I'm on the water. What am I doing on the water? And bloop, down he goes. Laws of nature took over again, right? And so we see this. So anything less than a mystery of God will cause us to chase after something other than God. Doubt often downgrades our theology, right? Where faith upgrades our theology. When you doubt, you start to think things about God that aren't true. Maybe God won't protect me. Maybe God doesn't love me. Maybe God doesn't want the best for me because he's not doing what I want him to do. I pray that he would heal this person who's in the hospital and they're dying, and I pray for their healing. I pray for their release from this cancer, and they die. And then I say, well, now I doubt, God, whether God calls all those that have gone before and trust him to resurrect that body. His body, like all of ours, I pray, are going to be glorified. Folks, I don't want this body for eternity. This one's broken. It doesn't work right. And yet God's going to call me out of the tomb one day, unless he comes back in my lifetime. And I'm going to have glorified bodies. I remember when we were praying for my dad. Dad passed away about 3 years ago. Hey, me too. Right? Did you think? And then, bloop, he goes, nope, not going to ask you. Right? As soon as I saw that, I'm like, right? And so they were so focused on that is crazy. That is impossible to walk on water. And yet when they watched their brother Peter, not to mention their master Jesus, walk on the water, that had to alter them. That had to change them forever. Right? To be able to say, I saw Peter, I saw Jesus walk on water, that I understand the purpose of a boat out on the Sea of Galilee. We can't just go out and walk. I wonder how many times they walked up to the shore of the Sea of Galilee and stepped in the shallows. Don't know how he did it. Every time I step, my foot goes right down to the bottom, but we saw what we saw, right? John 6:8. Somebody grab that, please, for me. John 6:8.
8 or 18?
18. Thank you. Yes.
The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing.
The sea becomes rough. This is, I just pulled that little verse out because it's part of the fear that mankind had developed, and probably still today. I think there's a healthy fear for us when we're in a boat in the water and it's rough. I've been on Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, when I was living in Michigan, in places where there were storms and so forth, sometimes enjoying myself, sometimes pretty afraid. The water demonstrated a place of fear. And the reason it was fearful is because it was evil. Like I said, some people envisioned it being a gateway to hell and Hades. And so here's kind of the powerful thing. As Jesus is walking on the water, that actually is a sign of dominance. I don't know if you guys have ever seen when Saddam Hussein was finally toppled and they started pulling the statues down. What did the local people do to the statues? Do you remember? They hit them with their shoes. See, there's nothing more insulting than putting the sole of a shoe on something, because it's the lowest part of your body. So, like when Jesus said to his disciples, if you're rejected from a town preaching the gospel, what do? Shake the dust off the bottom of your sandals and walk on. I leave what's on the bottom of my shoe with you. Right? And so Jesus walking on water, putting the water under his feet, demonstrated a dominance over the evil and the chaos that they interpreted that being. It's a powerful statement. This wasn't just, look, I can walk on water. He's standing on chaos. He stands on the evil of this world. Now, I kind of resist dealing with this word because I don't like using the word devil. But Jesus is a daredevil. And what I mean by that is he is daring the devil. Right? The devil thinks that I can control and cause fear and distrust and stuff in this world. And yet Jesus says, I'll dare you by my demonstrating my dominance. Right? My authority over the things of this world. Somebody have first Mark 5, rather. Just tell me what it's about. It's 20 verses. We're not going to read it all. Mark 5, what's it about?
Jesus heals a man with a demon.
Yeah, this is Legion. If you remember this, when Jesus comes across the water, it's not the same story. He comes across the water, Gerasenes, naked guy comes running out of the cemetery to oppose Jesus. So he's attacking, right? He's not just hiding away. He comes and shows himself to Jesus. What do you want with us? And Jesus says, who are you? He says, we are Legion, for we are many. Now, Legion in the Roman era would see roughly 6,000 men in a Roman legion. So whether that's a reference to the number of demons that are actually taking up residence within this man, it says that it's formidable, right? And so what do? Recognizing the power of Jesus at that moment, they pray, don't destroy us, because that time is coming when they'll be cast into hell, right? We'll talk about that another day. Throw us into the pigs. as we cast into the pigs run off the cliff into the water and so forth, and recognizing God's authority to do it. And as they opposed him and challenged him, he said, no, be quiet. And then cast them out, and really just doing that not out of mercy, not being merciful. He said, it's not time yet. Not time. But you don't get to dictate what happens. Okay? For us, 1 John 4:18. Somebody have that for us? 1 John, not the Gospel of John. 1 John.
There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not perfected in love.
So it talks about this idea of the irrationality of fear, but let me tell you what fear is. If you fear God, and I mean revere him, not afraid of him like Martin Luther demonstrated, if you fear God, you have nothing else to fear. If you revere God as being supreme, I had to do that as a kid sometimes. You know, my mom and dad would say, don't be afraid of the dark, don't be afraid of that, don't be afraid of this. He said, I want you to pray. I want you to talk and learn about who God is. And when you learn that God is with you, then you seek to not fear anything else. It doesn't mean you still don't take precautions and things like that. I don't continue to reach my hand over that fence to that snarling dog and go, I believe in Jesus. Right? That's not the point. It's being foolish. But it doesn't mean that I sit there in fear over things. I don't worry about viruses or cancer or things like that. If I trust in God, a reverence fear of God, a healthy fear of God, there's nothing else to fear. Instead, I look at it and go, if I contract cancer, that's another part of my story that God intends to use. It's not a, oh no, this changes everything. You're like, well, I didn't expect that, I didn't see that coming. But if I fear God, I don't fear cancer. I don't fear a virus. I don't fear job loss. I don't fear relationships that get strained. Instead, I say, well, God, how are you going to use this? Right? Because if I fear God, there's nothing else to fear. Because if there is, then that's me in my own brain saying there's something more powerful than God. Right? God is more powerful than everything else. So if I revere him, if I focus on him, there's nothing else to cause fear. Nothing. If you do, then you're saying something else is as powerful as God. All right? Now, except for falling and loud noises, those are the two natural fears that every human being has. Falling and loud noises. They're actually wired in. Everything else is learned. You learn to be afraid of anything else. You teach yourself. And a lot of times that's probably poor. Right? So falling, that naturally, I told you about when my kids, I'd throw them up in the air to catch them. Right? I didn't have to teach them to do that. Right? They would go, oh, right? That fear of falling. That's why, when you fall in your dreams, that's very natural fear of dreaming. You're, right? That's a terrible fear. I had to develop the fear of sharks. Right? In freshwater lakes in Canada. Right? I had to develop that. It's ridiculous. Okay? But fears are learned. So if they're learned, they can be unlearned. Capernaum was not the actual destination for the disciples, even though he says, I'm going to send you across the water. We're going to go over to Capernaum. I believe the destination was 3.5 miles out in the center of the Sea of Galilee. That was actually the destination. Of course, if he would have told them that, it wouldn't have had the same impact. I want you to go out in the middle of the lake, in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, and I want you to wait for me. And talk about, what are we waiting for? Is he swimming out here? Right? All right. Couple of things. Let me just kind of tie a bow on this. The last one, Matthew 14:24. I'll just give you this. You cannot have a comeback without a setback. And what I want to highlight on that is the reason that God, I'll go back to those other two. Those things, we're just running out of time. When we think about miracles ought to humble us, and they're always coming at a time when we have a setback. Something happens, there's a scare, there's a fear, there's something broken, and we realize that we are powerless to fix it. Maybe we can help, but we can't solve it. And without a setback, you guys can't have a comeback. And God always, his miracles are all about comeback. And he wants comebacks, because comebacks they're kind of dramatic. They're memorable. They're powerful. And God wants that for us. He says, I want you to be inspired, and I want you to be moved by this, and I want it to change your future. In fact, I want it to change your eternity. And so he says, I'll let you get to that setback, for sure. As a dad, I let my kids get to setbacks. I'm going to give you a job. It's going to be hard, right? And I want you to have success, and I might help you or I might not, but I want you to gain that success. The only way to do that is to make it hard. If you want to increase something, it usually means friction. You have to be challenged by something. God does the same thing. I'm going to allow you to get to a setback so that you can have the comeback. All right. The above copies there, the eye of providence, if you want to jot that down. That's the all-seeing eye on our money that our early fathers, founding fathers, wanted to believe was God's eye. It's not anything else weird that you've seen in movies or things like that. It's meant to be the eye of God, the all-seeing eye of providence. Jehovah Roy is one of the names of God, the God who sees in Hebrew. All right, let's close in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you for your grace, your mercy, and your miracles. And so, Lord, I pray that we are inspired, in awe, and Lord, excited about what you've demonstrated by your walking on the water. Lord, nothing is impossible for you. And Lord, I pray that as we think about this, that we would ask on occasion to get out of the boat and walk on the water, do the impossible in this world to your glory. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. God bless you guys. Have a great week.